Maryland, where I was born and raised. There are a lot of memories that come with driving in my hometown and in this section of my hometown. For example, to my right is Alexander Hamilton Elementary School. That's where I went to school as a young child, and it's where we began to see some of the racial shifts, because this was a changing neighborhood, and in this changing neighborhood that was largely Jewish, and but as the white flight, as it was called, took place, obviously changes in school and the people moving in and those moving out, as is the case in so many of our communities. But I have fond memories of my time in elementary school. Plus I could walk to school. It was really safe to walk to school back then, and I would walk to school, and it would be a great time of growing and learning and just in community, because this started out as more of a blue class, blue collar working environment, but things began to change over time. There was a great sense of community early on as a young kid. You know, it was my father's house was the first house he got to own, and because of the white flight, he was able to get it at a very inexpensive price. It was very expensive for him, but as dollars and cents go, it wasn't greatly expensive, and through a great amount of sacrifice, he was able to acquire it, since the folks who were here wanting to leave. As we entered into the mid-'60s, there was a lot of racial tension in our nation and in Baltimore, Maryland. I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I was at a friend's house and saw it coming over the news and saw the pain on the nation's face. And then, of course, major riots broke out here in Baltimore, and the National Guard was up in front of our home and all along our street and in the neighborhood to keep order during a very tense time in our nation. But I also remember how my father's faith caused us not to become bitter, hurt, disappointed. and even angry but not bitter, because my father would always remind me that God is in control. And even though it was unjust and even evil, I was never to lose sight that God was in control, and that he would do that all the time about anything. So as I look at the division in our nation today, it comes in all shapes. There's cultural division, class division, there's racial division, gender division. We've not been able to get away from the pain of the divisions in our culture. But because of the spiritual influence that I had, I was never allowed to limit myself to the reality that I saw. I couldn't deny it. It was all up in my face. But I couldn't limit myself to it because God was so much bigger. And I had to make sure that I was planting my feet firmly in my faith in the midst of the frustration and confusion. Because there was a lot of confusion. There were places I couldn't go because I was black. There were things I couldn't participate in because I was black. But my father always was reminding me in one form or another that I was a son of a king, and I was a king's kid, and that I was to define myself not by how other people thought about me, and sometimes not even how I thought about me, but what God said about me and how God related to me, and to believe God in the midst of the unbelievable occurring. And so that was instilled in me, and so that helped me rise above it because he rose above it. So I had two things. I had him rising above the division and the discrimination that he had to deal with, but him causing me to rise above it too, and to never limit myself to the limitations others put on me, whether it was wrong limitations by another race or self-imposed limitations on myself, that I could look bigger, see bigger, think bigger than my reality because the God I served was bigger. And so little did I know he was setting the stage for a kingdom man rising moment in me. And so I never succumbed. And while other people were giving up, throwing in the towel, or becoming violent, or becoming unforgiving, I couldn't get into that space, or at least I could only visit there. I couldn't live there because he would not allow me, bringing God and his word, just inundating me with a biblical worldview that said that God is not an impartial God, and that I could trust that same God to do for me what other people were expecting that God to do for them. In fact, as I drive up this particular street, the church on my left was the church that I attended, our family attended, Perkins Square Baptist Church. Reminds me of the religious segregation that was during my time. I mean, people who believed the Bible, loved the Lord, still wouldn't let us come worship with them. And so there was a dichotomy. And I don't know how we expect the culture to get better when the church can't get along and when we are illegitimately segregated and making a sin problem a skin problem and not dealing with the problem of illegitimate discrimination, illegitimate rejection, and whether it's individual by families or systemic, because the systems have been set up that have disfranchised people and marginalized people and kept them locked into a situation. So you've got a dynamic. In this area, as I'm driving here now, was a major part of the riots. There was a movie theater over here to my left, and that movie theater was torn down as part of the rioting over the assassination of Martin Luther King. And it pains me to know that that the divisions that I saw as a child still exist. Children aren't born racist. They have to be taught that from a parent or from relatives or from the environment in which they're in. So as kingdom men, we got to rise above it. We got to set a new standard. We got to set a new pace in the culture that says we as men will not accept the evil that the culture wants to either accept, or the rejection or denigration of people because they don't fit our color, they don't fit our class, They don't fit our socioeconomic context. You know, unless there were people in my life that taught me a better way, that gave me a divine perspective, that influenced me, then I wouldn't be where I am today. I am where I am today by the grace of God, using people, starting with my dad, because my dad wouldn't desert me and wouldn't desert our family, even though times were tough and we didn't know how we were going to eat. He would never desert us. But then through a man like Martin Resnick, who gave me a bigger vision of a world that I never knew before. I never knew that I could do some of the things and be some of the things, and those were exposed to me. So if you would have seen me early on, maybe somebody would have written me off. But because there were influences in my life that showed me that I could be different and do different, then I became different. And that's desperately what we need today. Not a generation of young boys in particular, girls too, but especially young men, because men are called to a position of unique responsibility under God. But I've seen in my own life what can happen when men of strength and character mentor, invest in the lives of young men who need to see better, know better, do better, and invest in their lives with time and with mentoring, and particularly spiritually based mentoring, where they're bringing them into relationship vertically with God, but horizontally with themselves, so that they can be an example. Like Paul told Timothy, follow my example. And then we need to be men of righteousness and justice. Yes, we want a moral standard that should govern every man's life and his choices and his morality and his decision making. But we also need a just standard. Justice is the application, the equitable application of God's moral law in society. We got to make sure people are treated fairly. They're giving equal opportunity. Now the outcomes, people will determine based on their own determination and commitment and giftedness. We can't control all outcomes, but we can make sure that opportunities are just and that people are not so marginalized that opportunities to get ahead, to better themselves, to be responsible are ripped away from them, thus taking away their hope. Because one of the problems we're facing is hopelessness. Because when a man loses hope, you've ripped everything from him. In fact, you've destroyed him when you've taken a man's hope away, because to take a man's hope away is to take his manhood away. Because God gives men hope. He tells Abraham, I've chosen you. I got a big plan for you. In fact, it's a multi-generational plan. That's what we need. Men who bring all of the males under the covenant of God, righteously before God, but justly before men, condemning injustice and unrighteousness and treating them equally. who want to save the babies in the womb, but who also want to give fair practices for people once born to the tomb. Whether those practices are job opportunities or proper housing, or dealing with the illegitimate gerrymandering of districts, which makes it unfair for people who are outside and marginalized. I mean, it comes in a lot of shapes and sizes, but men who've been given opportunity, gifting, resources, should be giving it back to the kingdom, so that we are identifying men and raising them up to be kingdom men, and they're rising. And we're seeing men rise, dead bones coming together like Ezekiel saw, and rebuilding a nation of men who now begin to envelop the culture with proper manhood, who are committed to their families and who don't just walk away when times get tough. I've had some emotions that I've had to overcome. I remember when I was looking out my window during the riots when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I'm looking at all the National Guard outside, and I'm feeling and seeing the anger during that time, and I'm conflicted because I'm dealing with the reality that's painful. I'm dealing with folk who are just doing their job. They're the National Guard. They're called out there. I'm dealing with why we even in this situation to begin with. And then I'm dealing with my training from my father. Love your enemy. Don't love what they do, but you got to love them. You love the sinner and hate the sin. And trying to just balance all of that in my mind and my head. But I've got one other principle I've got to bring to bear, and that is the principle that I was taught, that my faith overrules everything else, even my feelings. And so I had to operate on faith. And I remember asking my father, okay, can I take the guards that were right outside of our house something to drink and something to eat? It's coming to mind now that I actually asked my parents, could I do that as a way of showing grace and kindness in a difficult situation. And of course that takes me right back to the scripture again of heaping coals on someone's head who may even be an enemy, because you don't know what people are going to say and what people are going to think. And ministering in grace and not succumbing to the vitriol that my environment called for, that was based on legitimate pain, but legitimate fear, because I didn't know what was going to happen next. And moving beyond that. And I've tried to carry that principle with me through life of rising above, not without endorsing the wrong and needing to even condemn the wrong, but rising above it and not succumbing to it. I remember a situation as a grown man, and an Anglo guy comes in and he calls me boy. Now, when he calls me boy, all of my history rises at that point in my mind. One, I'm black, he's white. He's using a term of denigration based on history. And I'm older than him. So all of that is hitting me at the same time. And he calls me boy. So I could feel something revving up inside of me as I wanted to respond. But I decided to pause and whisper a quick prayer. Give me wisdom, Lord, because I don't want to skip it, but I don't want to address it inappropriately either. So I have to push pause. That's a good thing to do when you're upset, is to push pause. Because a few minutes later, another white gentleman came in and he called the white gentleman boy. And that changed the whole atmosphere of the conversation. Because where it was personal at first, it was no longer personal because he did it with people in his own race. And so that taught me a great lesson, and that is, when possible, give people the benefit of the doubt, because maybe that was not the intent. Maybe it was not wrong because it was just their habit, and so nothing was meant by it. And this is why, we can't get beyond this racial thing now, because everything is so sensitive that anything can cause an offense. And we gotta learn to push pause and correct things where they're corrected. But even when you correct, speak the truth in love. Let the person know that you want to tell them the truth in a way that heals the problem, not exacerbates or accentuates or makes the problem worse. So when you minister through grace, because we all need grace. In fact, one of the principles that I do remember is that if one day you're gonna need mercy, you better grant it to somebody else. Give them the opportunity to refuse mercy. Don't neglect the responsibility to offer it. So that happens. I mean, I remember when I was denied the opportunity to get on radio, and I was told by one radio station manager, point blank, a black speaker on radio would offend too many of our white listeners. And I will never forget him telling me that, and the feeling I had that my skin color, everybody was telling me, oh, you preach the word, you're teaching the word, but my skin color alone would deny me getting on Christian radio. And that was hurtful. That was hurtful. It was honest, and it could have been true, but it was hurtful, and it was unfair and raw. But even though that was the case, God overruled it. He brought another Christian leader in who opened up a whole bunch of doors for me to get on radio. So that showed me something too. That the enemy may come in like a flood, but God can raise up a standard against him. And so that let me know that, okay, one person can turn you down, but I got other sheep in this fold, and so I can turn this thing around. And that keeps me from either not getting angry or not lingering in anger, because I know God can interrupt things if I'm doing what I should do. Because a lot of times, people who are legitimately hurt block God from turning it around because they let their own anger, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. And once you take over that role, then you stop God from taking that role in the way he wants to take it. And so you wind up making it worse. And so that's what we're doing. We're making our problems worse and worse and worse, and we're getting further apart and further apart all the time while we're singing songs, praying prayers, and preaching sermons. We're getting further and further apart from each other and from God. So I just say, let's let God be the God he is, and that doesn't